So let's talk about that design for the masses. The population at this point is starting to increase rapidly. And of course, there's going to be an increased demand for housing. And apartments in urban areas and houses in suburban areas are going to be built primarily on speculation. Now, the problem is, as we move to these single-family homes, as I've touched on a couple of times here, you'll notice that they become increasingly cookie cutter. There's nothing really standing out about these homes. It's not the tradition of a home that was built for a specific family or a home that has a history to it. These are quick builds. In fact, we'll see bungalows based loosely on different styles being very, very common in this period. So if your house doesn't stand out outside, what do? Add that to the fact that the income level is going to increase dramatically between 1945 and 1955, giving people more disposable income. And what you get are houses that fit the form and interior design that fit this entire idea. It fits with the disposable income because, of course, people start to look at furniture as something that can be swapped out, whereas up until this point, you would never swap out a table. You would keep grandma's old table because it was there. It was a pragmatic decision. I don't have to buy another one. We will see families moving sometimes as often as every 3 to 4 years, so furniture becomes lighter weight and more portable. Most importantly, because those houses all look so similar, the focus becomes the interior rather than the exterior. Because there's a limit as to how much you want your house or your yard to stand out before the HOA shows up and gives you a ticket for having grass that's too long or a house that's purple. So let's talk about those homes. A lot of builders will pop up in this period. They will have these homes that are based on specific ideas, usually some historical precedent, but only in the facade or through some minor detail. For example, the Mount Vernon that we're looking at on the left looks somewhat like a Cape Cod, as if a Cape Cod had heard a description of itself but never actually seen itself in the mirror. A lot of builders will have one or two specific forms, and then they kind of play off of it. So a couple of details changed here, and we have a Dutch colonial with 2 chimneys on either side of the building, even though they're not really functional. Then the neighbor could have a Spanish colonial with a little bit of adjustment, maybe an adobe or stucco finish on the building, but it's still basically the same house. If you go through any of these post-war, immediate post-war 1940s, 1950s subdivisions, you'll see this. They're just basing it on a very basic surface understanding of what would differentiate these homes. The interiors tend to become increasingly bland. This is in part because of resale value and in part because people are constantly changing their decor. So the ceilings will typically be some kind of textured ceiling, but left solid white. And I'm sure if you look up right now, you'll see a solid white ceiling in most cases. Walls will become increasingly muted, even more so than what we've seen from Art Deco or arts and crafts. There's no linear designs standing out. But this is again meant for the masses. Carpets aren't meant to stand out. Furniture isn't meant to stand out. You want to fit in with the Joneses, which means everyone has kind of the same decor and kind of the same stuff, which also leads to problems on the antique market when these people try to sell their stuff, but that's a whole different ball of wax. Let's look at furniture. Now, of course, in the upper classes, they're again dealing with period or specific forms and styles, and we've dealt with that. That's where Art Deco, Art Moderne, the international style, etc. comes in, but that's not boiling down to the middle classes quite yet. They might have 1 or 2 pieces, but they're not decorating their whole home in the style. Instead, they will look at revivals, but they will update revivals. This would be Gothic revival from a Spanish designer. So we have that sort of Gothic feel of the ironwork, although you know now that that isn't really Gothic, but it gives people a sense of the Gothic. There's a difference between what is historical and the way that you update it. Here, they also use a very thick glass surface, giving you that sense of heaviness that we tend to have from Gothic furniture. But as we move through these revivals, what you get is something that's more and more modern and moves further and further from the original because, of course, you're kind of taking a Xerox of a Xerox of a Xerox. The designer's probably looking at Gothic Revival, which is based on earlier Gothic Revival, which is based on earlier reproductions. You get the idea. We also see the rise of borax furniture. Now, this is not furniture made of laundry soap, but rather this is furniture that is generally considered to have little purpose and little artistic meaning. What the term actually originally comes from is when you bought certain laundry detergents, you could collect coupons, much like we do box tops from cereal today. And if you got enough pieces, you could send them in and get a couch or some other piece. But it came to mean furniture that had no real aesthetic value whatsoever, that was mixing forms, that had no real basis in history. And so we see pieces like we do on the right here. And in this piece, you would look at it and go, well, it's kind of Art Nouveau. I mean, we've got the decorative floral pattern. We've got these lines, but this is almost more acanthus work akin to the Baroque than it is akin to what you would typically see from Art Nouveau. We see sort of a Chippendale break front on here, even though we know it's obviously not Chippendale. We have the use of swag down here, something that we would see in the French Renaissance or the French Baroque, even though the piece definitely doesn't fit that. The use of veneers and the grain of the veneer standing out, that's something that's coming from, for example, Art Deco, but it's being applied here in a whole different way. This is obviously not Art Deco. So you get this cheap, inexpensive furniture. Today, this would be sort of Steinhoffels, where they're mixing different forms together. It works if you're in the middle class or the working class. It does not work if you're in the upper class, where you're expected to have period pieces or maybe the appropriately aged antiques. We will, however, see the rise of Lazy Boy. The use of the recliner will be developed at this period. It will be, it's based, as we know, on Jacobean reclining furniture. But here, this is all mechanized. So as we're all familiar, you pull the lever on the side, the bottom kicks up, the back kicks down, and you get a nice, comfy chair. And this is actually invented as the Lazy Boy chair, which is why we use the term today. It's interesting because it fits the style and fits the ideas. How? I mean, it isn't clearly Art Deco, but think about it. We have a period of time where the working class wants to be comfortable. They don't have enough money to decorate their house in the same way the middle class or upper class might. But comfort and having dad's chair, for example, is going to be very important. That's where Lazy Boy comes in. It is the most comfortable chair in the house. And it has that same idea behind it as Art Deco, but instead of coming out of austerity, it's coming out of actual, I don't want to say hardship, but a lack of ability to get the higher end items. So we end up with this break between ideal and reality. And we've seen this historically throughout, where we see the working class different in their interior design, their architecture, their homes, etc., from the upper classes. So what you might see in an interior design magazine is something like this, sort of a mid-century modern decor. Everything in its place, everything clean. The dog is even properly groomed, polished, probably stuffed. Either way, versus the reality, which is probably a much smaller space, decor that doesn't quite fit that awkward lamp in the corner that we're all familiar with, a very cluttered space, something that would appear more Victorian, but those Victorian ideas exist for a reason. We have stuff, and we like stuff, and so we need places for it, whereas here you almost have to be a minimalist to live in this space, despite all of this storage. Of course, you can't imagine someone cleaning it up on a daily basis to make sure that it's set for a magazine cover. So This is important to keep in mind. While you think that you're going to go and decorate for this, and many of you will, oftentimes you will be decorating for this and trying to update something that has no real direction to it whatsoever. This is the common reality for probably 90% of the population in the United States, even during our period, that immediate post-war period.